As Prohibition-era New York lurched deeper into lawlessness, a brutal turf war engulfed the city's streets. Rival bootleggers and gangland henchmen stalked the avenues under cover of night, and even daylight could not purge the terror. One FBI account described how Dutch Schultz's empire in the Bronx was under constant assault from mobsters like Legs Diamond and Vincent, Mad Dog Coll, leading to significant bloodshed on all sides. Gunfire and sirens became almost routine. Turf boundaries were drawn in blood. In those years, Coll was already a name to fear. Born an Irish immigrant in 1908 and raised in the Bronx's working-class neighborhoods, he had earned a reputation as a trigger-happy prodigy of Schultz. But Coll's ambition grew beyond being just a hired gun. Before long, he would break away and make himself one of New York's most notorious outlaws. By summer 1931, Coll's crimes had become so brazen that his deeds echoed through Harlem and beyond. He was even responsible for the accidental slaughter of a child in the streets of East Harlem, an event that cemented his legacy of terror. In late July 1931, Coll's gang opened fire on a rival gang's car, aiming at bootlegger Joseph Joey Rao. Stray bullets tore into the street crowd, injuring several children and fatally wounding 5-year-old Michael Vangali. Vangali's tragic death drew citywide outrage. New York's Mayor Jimmy Walker was said to have turned Coll's despicable act into a warning, dubbing the killer Mad Dog. The name stuck. Never before had the city seen such reckless carnage, and the press howled for justice. Coll's face and nickname were splashed across front pages. His blood-stained legend was born out of this one misfired hit. At the time of that summer shooting, Coll was still in his early 20s, barely older than a street punk. He had come up through New York's Irish gangs. As a teenager, he fought in the Gopher Street gang and proved himself a vicious enforcer. By 1927, when he was just 19, Coll was already implicated in murder. In one case, he was accused of shooting a speakeasy owner who refused to sell Dutch Schultz's liquor. Remarkably, he was acquitted. Some accounts say he went free only because Schultz leaned on the jury. Inflamed by that success, Coll grew bolder. He brazenly robbed a Bronx dairy truck without Schultz's permission, raiding the very territories Dutch considered his own. When Schultz confronted him about the heist, Coll snarled back that he deserved to be a partner, not an underling. That was the final straw. From that point on, Coll and Schultz were enemies. The protégé had turned on the boss. In early 1930, Coll formally broke away and formed his own gang, launching a bloody private war for control of New York's underworld turf. Vincent Coll's war to build an independent empire was financed by kidnappings and robberies. He and his men would abduct rival gangsters and extort cash, knowing that such targets would never report the crime to police. As one historian notes, Coll had no friends in the underworld due to his lucrative sideline of kidnapping other gangsters and holding them for ransom. In mid-1931, as the nation reeled from the St. Valentine's Day massacre in Chicago, Coll escalated his campaign. On July 28, 1931, he ordered an attempt to kidnap Dutch Schultz's lieutenant, Joey Rao. Coll's gunmen chased Rao's car through the tenements of East Harlem and unleashed a fusillade of gunfire. In that spray of bullets, little Michael Vangali was caught by fate. The 5-year-old had been playing on a stoop when Coll's bullets tore through the hot July air, striking the boy fatally. The shooting was so fierce that 5 other children were hit, one of them critically. The kidnap plot itself failed. Rao escaped, but the collateral slaughter of an innocent child shocked New Yorkers to the core. The city's normal code of mobsters only kill each other shattered instantly. With Vangali's death, Vincent Coll became the symbol of unchecked violence. No gangster had ever shown so little restraint. Mayor Walker publicly condemned the act and effectively christened Coll Mad Dog, a name that would prove too apt for the chaos he wrought. When Coll was hauled into court for the Vangali killing, city investigators hoped they had enough to finally cage the beast. Police lined the suspect up in court, surrounded by officers, and pressed him on the stand, but Coll remained defiant. He sat in court with a Cheshire grin, swearing he was innocent. His lawyer was famed defense attorney Samuel Leibowitz. Under Leibowitz's cross-examination, the key witness, an arrested henchman named George Brecht, collapsed under scrutiny, revealing he had testified in other trials for small pay. The jury's patience snapped. To the courtroom's horror, Coll was declared not guilty in December 1931. Justice had failed. Newspapers howled that New York's public had been denied retribution for an unspeakable crime. But Coll walked free. He had outmaneuvered the system once again. Freed and still full of steam, Coll immediately plunged back into violence. He treated the acquittal as proof he could do anything. In a remarkable act of defiance, he even took a contract to kill Charles Lucky. Luciano, one of the country's most powerful gangsters. In September 1931, Coll accepted a hit arranged by mafia boss Salvatore Maranzano. The plan was to assassinate Luciano during a meeting, strengthening Maranzano's grip on New York. But Luciano's informants were sharp. When Coll arrived late, Luciano's men had already gunned down Maranzano, turning the tables. Coll was blamed for the ambush and quickly found himself on the other side of a gang war. Furious, Lucky marked Coll for death. Luciano offered a huge bounty of $50,000 on Coll's head and put the hit in the hands of Dutch Schultz's allies. Coll's old friend Oni Madden, himself an Irish mob boss now with Senate Street fame, was co-opted into the plan. Coll had gone from predator to prey almost overnight. By early 1932, Vincent, Mad Dog Coll was hunted like an animal. Schultz and Madden combined forces to trap him. On January 31, 1932, two of the mob's killers burst into a Bronx apartment where Coll was rumored to be hiding. Gunmen Leonard Scarnissi and Anthony Fabrizio sprayed 6 occupants with bullets. 3 people died and 3 others were critically wounded, a massacre, but Coll wasn't there. He had been detained on a tip at the last minute, lucky by chance. The apartment was torn apart in that burst of violence, and police flatly told the mobsters, this must stop. But it didn't stop. Instead, Schultz decided to lure Coll directly into his clutches. He concocted a fake peace meeting, a promise that wouldn't be kept. Coll, trapped by desperation, agreed to meet. He was fed details, told that a settlement had been arranged by his old ally Oni Madden, who would broker a compromise to spare everyone further bloodshed. Coll walked into the mouth of the lion. On the night of February 8, 1932, Vincent Coll's hunted life came to an end. He entered the London Chemist's drugstore at 314 West 23rd Street, next to the corner of 8th Avenue. On its black marble floor, a lone telephone booth stood framed in glass. Coll stepped into that glass booth and lifted the receiver. His hands trembled, perhaps with relief or trepidation, in any case too late. From outside the store, the killers lurked. Abraham, Weinberg, Schultz's former lieutenant, had been promised a peaceful turn for acting as bait. As Coll dialed, Weinberg and the hitman stood by the entrance. They had been told to keep cool, to look like innocent bystanders. Then, with a silent signal, Leonard Scarnissi slipped forward. Coll did not see the gunman or hear him approach. Scarnissi pressed the stock of his Thompson submachine gun against the glass. In 2 thunderous bursts, he opened fire through the booth. Bullets tore into Coll's body and the glass around him. The frightened stenches of cordite mingled with Coll's last gasp. When Scarnissi was done, Coll was slumped lifeless behind the phone. The entire ambush took mere seconds. 2 bursts of gunfire in a cramped phone booth, and Vincent Coll fell not to the police, but to the mob's ruthless retribution. The job was as clean as vengeance could make it. Scarnissi calmly turned and raised a finger to his lips at 2 stunned witnesses, cashier George Scott and customer Dr. Leo Katz, as if to say, keep quiet. Then he rejoined Weinberg and Fabrizio outside. By the time the police arrived, Coll was dead on the floor of the booth. His body was carried out of the store under blankets. Later, a coroner's report would list 15 bullets removed from Coll's corpse. That many bullets, 15 holes in a man, was a savage tally. Remarkably, no arrests followed. Schultz and Madden had done their grim work. They even sent a wreath to Coll's funeral adorned with a ribbon reading, "From the boys," as if announcing that the mob zone had avenged themselves. Vincent, Mad Dog Coll, once so feared, was suddenly nothing but another corpse on the morgue slab. His life had ended in that little glass box phone booth, the booth becoming a crude coffin of shattered glass and bullet holes. Meanwhile, nothing had been heard from Bumpy Johnson. In Harlem, Ellsworth Raymond, Bumpy Johnson, watched from the shadows. By 1932, he was a man returned from prison, toughened by years of locked cells and slaps on cold steel. When Johnson walked out of a state prison in the spring of 1932, he was broke and quiet, only 26 years old, but already having spent half his life behind bars. Back in Harlem, he found a different power waiting. Stephanie St. Clair, the self-proclaimed policy queen who ran Harlem's lucrative lottery game, took the newly freed Johnson under her wing. To some, he was just a small, stocky black man with a shaved head and a gold ring in his nose, but his presence was immense. Under St. Clair's tutelage, Johnson became the unofficial guardian of Harlem streets. Johnson proved an unlikely warrior at first glance. He was just 5 feet 6 inches tall, but under St. Clair he learned the code of war. Her numbers racket was under siege by the Italian mob, led by Dutch Schultz. Johnson and St. Clair set out on a guerrilla campaign. By 1934, it was said that Johnson and a handful of fighters preyed on Schultz's men, like a pack of wolves. striking at night or ambushing small entourages. In fact, Mamie Hatcher Johnson, his wife, later wrote that Bumpy and his crew had picked off Schultz's gunmen one by one, hunting them relentlessly. According to interviews, the streets of Harlem ran red at times. At least 40 people died in gangland violence during that numbers war. St. Clair took hard knocks. He was even arrested and jailed, but Johnson kept moving. He proved to be a merciless enforcer, never hesitating to shoot or kidnap enemies who threatened their turf. Serving as St. Clair's bodyguard and chief enforcer, one biography recounts, Johnson murdered and kidnapped over 40 people in that era, all for the sake of Harlem's underworld prize. Still, the war wore on St. Clair's might. By the mid-1930s, the political and legal fallout of all that blood had drawn too much attention. With Dutch Schultz eyeing a hit on District Attorney Thomas Dewey, and the Mafia wary of more trouble, the balance of power finally shifted. In 1935, Lucky Luciano ordered Dutch Schultz killed to prevent an all-out war with the city's lawmen. Shortly after, Stephanie St. Clair quietly stepped back out of the game. Some sources say she handed control of her numbers operation over to Johnson. By then, Johnson had forged an alliance with the Genovese, Luciano's family. The deal was that Johnson could keep running Harlem so long as Luciano's mob got a share of the profits. In effect, Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson became the undisputed mob boss of Harlem's African-American community, with only a nod to the old Italian syndicate. He ruled the district even though he was no taller than a telephone pole. For the rest of his life, Johnson would walk the streets of Harlem like a crowned king. The gangster underworld respected and feared him. Even the law deferred where it could. It was said that corrupt precinct cops would sometimes warn him of raids. One historian notes that Johnson carried himself with quiet dignity that commanded respect from other inmates. And that was true on the outside too. As gangster biographies later noted, the people of Harlem grew to regard Bumpy as a kind of Robin Hood. He ordered food brought to poor neighbors and gave out free turkeys at Thanksgiving time. Nobody forgot that on the corner he had once loomed as high as any mob king. In casual interviews, citizens admitted they felt safer under Johnson's watch, no matter how violent he was behind closed doors. Because Johnson's ferocity was tinged with mercy or at least calculation, while Coll's madness was pure fury, they saw Bumpy as something more than a common killer. By early 1932, though, Vincent Coll's frenzy had unsettled everyone. In the weeks before Coll's death, Harlem's rumor mill churned. Some whispered that Coll had spoken of moving in on the numbers rackets or extorting businesses in Manhattan. Other stories claimed he was eyeing new territory after his war with Schultz. Whether any of it was true, it made Johnson wary. He must have felt that Coll, a notorious psychopath from the Bronx, had strayed onto Johnson's hunting grounds. If Coll had somehow declared himself lord over any part of Harlem, Johnson would have been there to oppose him. By then, Harlem had enough of white gangsters rolling through and shooting up the neighborhood. Johnson and his men were the only police Harlem really knew. Johnson himself would tell no one what he thought of Coll's crimes, if he even had the chance. But he certainly learned of Coll's fate soon after it happened. Late on that February night as Coll was gunned down in Manhattan, Harlem's crime boss was no doubt pleased. According to how the legend goes, he may even have arranged for a watchful eye on the phone booth at the chemist's. Perhaps a Harlem goon had tipped him off that Coll was being lured there. In any case, once the shooting stopped, Bumpy Johnson had to know that the man named Mad Dog was dead. Collins didn't go down in a hail of police bullets. He was cut down by other gangsters, effectively Johnson's rivals on what was otherwise Johnson's turf. The Mad Dog had run out of luck. Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson, shown above during his later time at Alcatraz, had by then already cemented his legend in Harlem. Even behind bars, he retained the aura of a sovereign. His outward calm and composure masked the killer he could be when pushed. Witnesses later noted that other prisoners admired Johnson's unshakable confidence. To the neighborhood, he was like a general who had led a victorious campaign. To rival mobsters, he was both a source of dread and grudging respect. Many who knew the underworld say that after Coll's death, rumors quickly spread that Johnson's supporters had laced the assassin's bullet. Whether true or not, it became part of the mythology. One story even held that Johnson had set the whole trap, like a Greek hero who outwitted a beast. Certainly, no one challenged Johnson openly again. By the end of 1932, Harlem's corners were quiet except for the murmurs of stories about how the city's most feared gangster had met his end. Bumpy Johnson would carry that power long after Coll was gone. Though he was rarely arrested in those gangster years, Fate finally caught up with him in the long term. In 1951, Johnson was convicted of heroin distribution and sent to the United States Penitentiary on Alcatraz Island. By then he was a legendary figure in federal records. He was inmate 1117 AZ, one of only a handful of African-American hardened criminals to occupy the Rock. Even in prison, his folk hero status never faded. Johnson was paroled in 1963 and returned to Harlem, older and wiser, but still renowned as the man who had tamed his streets. He died in 1968 of a heart attack, clutching a chicken leg and grits. According to the coroner, the corner of his favorite soul food restaurant fitting as a final scene for a Harlem king. In death, as in life, Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson was a figure of myth, the survivor of gunfights in prison terms, the black hustler who had stood up to the white mafia, and who in the end lived to an old age. In New York's crime history, he became something of a legend. Thus, the story of Mad Dog Coll and Bumpy Johnson comes down to us through the archives and memoirs of the time. We see Coll's trajectory through the terror he inflicted the little boy struck down in Harlem streets, the headlines proclaiming his dogged rampage, the courtroom drama and final ambush. We see Johnson's rise through the recollections of St. Clair's faded empire and the hushed rumors on Harlem stoops. In the end, the facts we know are grimly clear. Coll terrorized the city and died by the gun, 15 bullets in a glass phone booth. Johnson built an empire and died in bed. One man hunted and burned everything in his path until he was trapped and butchered. The other carefully guarded his turf and turned his enemies' attacks back. History gives us their real actions. Coll, the merciless young gangster responsible for at least dozens of violent crimes. Johnson, the calculating enforcer who survived decades. Their names endure in reports, in court and jail records, in interviews with underworld figures of that era, and in the mythic folk tales of Harlem. No fiction was needed, the truth was already strange and savage. That truth, pieced together from FBI files, old newspaper accounts, prison testimonies, and authoritative crime histories, paints a story as chilling as any legend, the real saga of how one gangster hunted another, and how Harlem's own boss ended up with the last word. Sources: contemporary newspaper archives, criminal biographies, and FBI historical records. See citations detail the careers of Vincent, Mad Dog Coll and Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson. Collins's crimes and death are documented in period news reports and retrospective gangland histories. Johnson's rise in Harlem and later incarceration are described in biographical and historical accounts. All narrative events above are drawn from those historical sources.